Amid so much uncertainty, there's only one thing that's really true, and that is that the future of the workspace is unlikely to be the same again. Technology has enabled us all to work from kitchen tables, dining tables, from the attic, and even in the garden in the summer, which has been incredible. But surely it doesn't have to be the end of the office. The question is, what happens next? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? How can we connect? How can we communicate? Personally, I miss being in the office. I'm actually in our office at the moment. I miss being around people. I miss the collaboration. When we come together, we have great ideas, and that's what sets businesses apart. So for me, I actually really want to get back into the office, but I'm very lucky in so much that I have choices. So I can work from home some days, I can work in the office, and I have you can see actually from the background, it's a beautiful place to be. So I am very lucky. To help us talk through these different questions, we've got a lovely panel of guests who are all chuntering and laughing at me. So if they're naughty, I apologise. And they're all going to talk about different things. So if I introduce you to Theo Holmes, he's Director of Agency at CBRE Birmingham, and he'll be talking from a perspective of landlords and tenants. And then we have Martin Sylvester, Director of Global Workplace and Travel for Arcadis, and we've been working with Martin over the last, gosh, I think it's nearly a year now, Martin, for relocating your HQ in London during a pandemic, which I have to say is probably not the best time to be doing that. And he also looks after their estate globally, so he's got a lot on his plate. And then Richard Peacock, he's fund manager for Aegon, who are large property investors, large portfolio, and he'll be talking to us from a landlord's perspective. So Theo, if I can hand over to you first, please. What are your thoughts and feelings on how will the workplace look and function?
Thanks very much, Tina. And for all of those tuning in, I'm sure Tina meant 700 and not 7 people have tuned in. Otherwise, maybe I don't need to be quite so nervous after all. Yeah, beaming to you here live from kind of a garden office in Edgbaston, like Tina. I'm very keen to get back into the office environment. I'm going to kind of talk two kind of strands, really, the investor side, the landlord side, and the occupier side, to really kind of illustrate what trends we're seeing on the ground at the moment. But I think firstly, I'll just kind of cover a bit of what the Birmingham market is doing at the moment and what we kind of saw last year. In terms of supply in Birmingham, we're actually really well balanced. There's less than 4% vacancy rates in the Grade A sector. And I suppose a little nuance of a regional market is we aren't seeing floods of space coming back to the market yet. Unlike, say, the capital, where businesses have multiple offices in a single office location, so easy to kind of consolidate down. Invariably in the regions, one business has one office. Admittedly, they are now trying to work out what size they need moving forward, which is the kind of the great unknown, and certainly something I'll look to explore in a little bit more detail as we go. 2020, obviously an interesting year in terms of the number of deals. Certainly in Birmingham, we were probably about a third of what we have historically witnessed over the past 10 years. But interestingly, as an aggregated square footage kind of take-up level, we were probably only down 25%, which was actually a really good result considering the market. If we look to what we're seeing at the moment, inquiries are picking up. That's probably aligned to the more positive news around the vaccine rollout. Occupiers who are touring at the moment are looking for a flight to quality, as it would seem that there is still that focus on retention and recruitment of quality staff. And certainly, again, something for the regions that we are seeing is the greater impact of north shoring, that relocation out of London and the southeast, which again is made even more possible by the modern kind of agile working technologies that we have. And it's this kind of net absorption which is so key to a city's success. It's not just local businesses churning space, freeing up more space, it's new entrants to the market, which is so important. And then something that happened last year, which we don't really hear much about, is the number of re-gears that happened in the market. So occupiers anticipating the value and the need of their offices, but who are doing transactions really to kind of assist with immediate cash flow issues. But looking at the kind of investor side, and what are some of our landlord clients up to at the moment, how are they reacting to the market? we are certainly now seeing, which is quite interesting, the birth of the hybrid model, a fitted solution which benefits from all of the USPs that the service office sector offers, and all of the merits, again, that you get from traditionally let space. And arguably this is going to kind of create a two-tier market, or a multi-tier market, where historically we had headline rents of £37 a square foot, for example, in Birmingham. Grade B, the tier would be kind of high teens to mid-20s. But with turnkey and hybrid solutions, the pricing, depending on the level of services and the structure of the deals, could vary hugely, £40 to £90 a square foot, depending on those services. And it's all about kind of what the occupier may actually want. Now, the conundrum for our investor clients is ultimately, how do you fit this space out? You know, this was always the question mark prior to COVID, and on the basis that we kind of still don't know how occupiers are going to use their space, it's made even more tricky to do this work speculatively. And again, how do you price it? And we'll have a look a bit later as to how occupiers are thinking of occupying their space shortly. Something that is key is speed of delivery for landlord space. So flood wiring space, getting space fully connected, removing any delays from arduous way leave agreements. And it's especially important now because we're seeing occupiers leave their decision making right to the last minute, really, because business is so uncertain at the moment. When we look at the kind of trend for amenity space being provided by landlords, that's probably only going to be supercharged further. And throughout all the categories, not just the Grade A market, we've seen great interventions by the likes of Aegon, Bruntwood, CEG locally, who are really raising the bar of their offering across their portfolio, whether that be the introduction of gyms, coffee shops, meeting room space. And in fact, in 2022, we are going to see Birmingham's first arrival of a bouldering room, which will be available in 10 Brindley Place, which is a CBRE GI product. CBRE have conducted some research, which has actually just been published in February, which is looking at tomorrow's office. And it actually looked specifically at the amenities that were going to be in vogue now for occupiers. And whilst historically some of those items that I've just mentioned are still high on the agenda, what we saw was a real move to flexibility and shared space. 92 and 80% of respondents respectively had that as kind of the top three items on their agenda. And building tech also, with over 50% focusing on that. And I suppose as digital technologies kind of create smarter, more efficient buildings, they're there to effectively kind of connect the employee experience and ultimately to create a safer and healthier workspace, which again, I suppose in the COVID world is even more important. But that's not just focused on kind of COVID-related interventions such as touch-free access. We've seen UV lighting coming in as well, and air filtration monitoring. But if working practices are going to change forevermore, landlords and occupiers have really got to understand how the space is working for them. If daily occupational rates are fluctuating, how does that impact on the heating, the cooling, the supply of services? So buildings have really got to give this kind of real-time feedback to their owners and their occupiers. As I now look to the kind of the occupier side, we are continuing to see occupiers conducting their surveys, working from home balance, office versus home. And interesting, in a survey, the future of the office that CBRE conducted at the end of last year, 70% of respondents suggested that a proportion of their workforce, a small proportion of their workforce, will work remotely full time. But interesting, when asked, will the physical office remain important? 48% said there would only be a minor decrease in its importance, and 38% said it would remain as important, if not more so. So it really illustrates that it's a balance. It's not one thing nor the other. And as Tina mentioned earlier, why is the office so important? It's about that community, that social interaction, the ability to collaborate, be productive, engage and recruit quality staff, and again, reflects a business's brand and culture. So, how is that office going to look? The Tomorrow's Office survey, to us, pointed in the direction of office place fluidity, with activity-based working, with non-dedicated seating, really driving team and collaboration-based working, and arguably a de-densification of office space. There'll be more task-based working by the looks of it, Zoom rooms, quiet zones. The open plan office was never really supposed to be a one-size-fits-all. It's really got to be on an occupier by occupier basis. The ability for businesses to scale up and scale down their space through furniture solutions as opposed to physical divides also seems to be a moving trend. And then the office being designed as more of a kind of a hospitality or event-inspired environment seems quite key. I mean, the feedback we're getting from remote working is it's impacting on innovation, pipeline development. You can't get those conversations and those relationships evolving. So a team-based design will probably evolve with shared zones, neighborhoods, with teams really focusing on their specific projects. I mean, whilst remote working has worked well because of our advancements in IT, actually it's only really been successful because of the values and relationships and the IP that the office environment had created. And I think that's why in recent times you're seeing corporate occupiers beginning to suggest that actually, the working from home models beginning to fray as those kind of relationships that were kind of spawned and blossomed in an office environment are beginning to now erode over time, which effectively it comes down to a balance. It's working flexibly, but with structure. The office works when people are there and they're engaged with each other. But of course, as the weekly staff numbers pulse on certain days, it's going to be really difficult for occupiers to work out, actually how much space do they actually need. So I suppose in summary, as I look forward to 2021, I think that we will see a market with a greater frequency of deals as occupiers begin to reposition their office needs in line with lease events. I think we might see an increase in rents, partly due to a fluctuation partly due to the flight to quality, but also because of the fact that there will be a menu of solutions available to occupiers provided by traditional landlords, right the way from traditional offices all the way up to the full flex. And the question then for occupiers will be, how do you compare like for like? It's going to be very difficult. Certainly for me, I think for me, COVID will be the birth of a better office. And I think now, having worked, so long now, it seems, from home, my view on life really is that I suppose whilst I can eat at home, it's better in a restaurant. Whilst I can drink at home, it is better in the pub. Whilst I can work from home, it certainly is better in the office. And I look forward to getting back to the office when restrictions are removed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Theo. A couple of things there I forgot to mention at the beginning, that if anybody's got any questions and answers, there's a little button at the bottom of your screen, so please send them through. We will be doing some questions and answers at the end of the webinar, but if there's people we can't get to, we will do it in the next couple of weeks, so don't worry about that, but feel free to ask us. You mentioned a lot about flexibility. Would you agree? I mean, you and I are very much at the forefront of seeing what new and beautiful workplaces can look like. That's what we do for a living. We create inspired working environments. But would you agree that the redesign, if you like, has already been there, that we're just seeing different proportions now? So before, where people are very desk heavy, for example, people like solicitors and things, they're starting to realise that actually they don't need the desks. But they're looking for collaboration, so the day job gets done at home, and then we do the collaboration, bumping of ideas in the workplace as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right here. I mean, I think and it's interesting because the legal sector certainly seems to be the ones that have embraced home working, but that arguably was because an open plan environment wasn't right for that task. So I really think that you will see fluctuations. I think whilst there will be areas for collaboration, I think you're going to have decent areas of space, specifically task-based, quiet zones, as I say, those kind of Zoom rooms, which will take up more space. The collaboration space will take up more space that perhaps the open plan was. Bit of de-densification. And again, this is the whole conundrum, I suppose, for occupiers. You think that would, more people working from home would create less space. but then actually when you've got people coming back into the office and you want to kind of curate that environment that's relevant for their tasks, actually can you? Again, there'll be a balance, but then there'll be a trade-off. But yeah, it's certainly evolving.
And I think it's also true to say that there is a big difference between wanting to come back to an office that's well designed and thought about than there is going back to an environment that's hasn't got the good lighting in there, hasn't got the good ventilation in there, doesn't have the the biophilia that's around the office and things. Are you finding that when you're taking people around the marketplace, or virtually that is, that they're asking for different things now?
There definitely there is a greater request for quality, knowing that they want to improve the environment to welcome their staff back. And I think this is arguably what's difficult with some of these occupier surveys, depending on where that business is in its lease life cycle. If that survey is happening at the end of a 10 or 15-year lease where the space hasn't been invested in, unsurprisingly, I think the feedback from the staff will probably be quite negative. Change that to a business that has probably just moved and invested in its environment, I think the feedback on a survey would be totally different. So yeah, it's going to be tricky for occupiers to accurately gain in reality what their staff want, depending on what they've provided for their staff before.
Brilliant, thanks Theo. That actually leads me really nicely to you, Martin, because Theo's mentioned a key word for you, which was building intelligence, because that's been very much a focus for us on your new HQ. But what are your thoughts on how the office will look and function?
Yeah, thanks Tina, and thanks Theo for a great introduction. And there's certainly quite a lot of things for me to sort of build on from an occupier's perspective, and hopefully as we build through that, we'll get a few more questions from those attendees. I can see that there's some coming in there, so that's quite good. For me, in my role at Arcadis, workplace affects 28,000 people across 70 different countries, and we've got around 3 million square feet of offices under occupation. So it's a very big, important factor to us as a business. And I think just from a perspective point of view, we moved virtually all of those people, so 28,000 people globally, in an incredibly short space of time, to working from home. And that's something I never thought I would see in my career. We're not an organisation, and I'll reference it quite a few times, that we're quite progressive. We didn't have kind of a presenteeism culture. We didn't have fixed desks. We've moved quite a long way in our workplace, but still, even being kind of a progressive organisation, we hadn't seen that level of home working. So it was kind of an incredible challenge. And I think that's probably where I'll start today, is that, first off, the geographical challenges of occupiers bring in quite a lot of complications. And what we're keen to make sure that we have is a consistent global workplace strategy. And that's an issue for quite a lot of occupiers, is to have consistency across their locations, and not having a situation where you've got have and have nots. Again, particularly relevant where you're operating in a lot of different countries. So for today, I thought what I'd do is from an occupier's perspective, just look at the kind of why, what and how we're doing on workplace, to try and stimulate some questions and discussion. And I think we all know the why we're changing, that workplace has fundamentally changed. And if one positive thing that the pandemic has done, it's accelerated that pace of change. And it's really presented all occupiers with a huge opportunity to do something different. And I think, at the start, there was lots of statements made, and I was never and continue not to be in the camp of the office is dead. I sit on quite a few forums with other corporate real estate directors, and it's like, oh, we're gonna get rid of our office space and everything else, and all our people will work from home. We know that's not going to work for us. We're a people-focused business. We're a client-focused business, and you can't do that totally remotely. We've had a great social experiment through this, where we've had to do it, but going forward, that's not the situation. And I think most occupiers are in that position as well. The office, as it exists in whatever format, for me, has a huge role to play in employee engagement and talent retention. That's the two things that I look at it. It's employee engagement, talent retention, and that collaboration with clients. But it's going to be different. We know it's going to be different. And we've done a lot of research internally. So we've used quite a lot of the CBRE survey data. True BBC style survey data is available from other suppliers as well. But I won't name check them today, Theo, don't worry. But we've also done a lot of research internally. So we've surveyed all of our people twice around workplace. We've done focus groups, and we've really taken the time to understand what people want. And the output from that is it aligns pretty similar to what Theo talked about, that people actually want a mix. We've seen it, that people are happy working at home. They've enjoyed elements of it, but there is now starting to creep in a boredom factor. And I did an interview yesterday, and I kind of talked around it. They asked me a question: how do you keep your energy? How do you keep your energy working at home? And I said, well, I vary my commute. Some days I run from the kitchen to my office across the hall. Other days I take a slow walk. And then other days I might really risk it and sort of hop. That's where we've got to, that our commute has become such a ridiculous thing, but we've got that time back. But that can't go on forever. And what we want to do with our people is build a workplace promise. And that's really important. And we've spent a lot of time looking at what that looks like. And that's around inclusive workplaces that inspire our clients. But really the main area is that they enhance collaboration. And picking up what Theo said, that's around promoting health and well-being of all of our people as well. That's really, really important. And I think as you alluded to, that well-being aspect of office design now is absolutely fundamental, because to me it's going to be a destination where you get a bit of a respite, which is completely different to what we had before, where home was where you kind of got your respite. But as you're working more and more in the office, that location becomes kind of crucial to rebuild your kind of social capital. I think what else we is really important for occupiers is, and I'll talk about this a little bit on the kind of how is our offices need to embrace a culture of trust, and we need to give people that choice as to whether they work from home or whether they come into collaboration hubs, collaboration focused workplaces, where they can meet colleagues and probably more importantly for us, clients. And also the benefit for us is we've got some very strong carbon footprint reduction targets, and reducing our footprint overall really does support our sustainability goals. So again, a real benefit for there as we try and move that agenda forward. Really, just to kind of close out is, how do I see occupiers doing this, and indeed how are Arcadis doing it? I mean, footprint reduction, absolutely. And I've heard lots of different stories from people around, and it's become one of those kind of bragging points, we're taking 70% out of our footprint and we're taking 80% out of our footprint. I mean, I think they're really kind of good, bold statements, and they're good for the press and they're good for the markets. But progressive occupiers, I don't think are going to be taking 70% out. I think it's somewhere between kind of 30 and 50%. It is a reasonable amount, assuming that you'd already been on that kind of journey around flexible and agile working. I mean, we've used all the techniques again that Theo talked about: re-gears, exits. We're looking at all of our lease events in a lot of detail, and everyone now, as opposed to it just being a sort of business as usual rollover, everything is up for grabs. I mean, Tinny, you alluded to the work OP are doing with our London development. That's a huge shift for us in what is one of our key locations globally. But we've really pushed the kind of boundaries there to develop something new, something innovative, and really kind of embrace the digital, and as you said, intelligent buildings. We're really pushing the envelope on that, and we're very hopeful that that'll support our new our workplace. Our CFO came out with a great quote the other day, and it really rings true to me, which she said to to me that we need not to offer our people less, but we need to offer them something different. I kind of paused on that for a bit and thought, that's absolutely what occupiers need to do. Is yes, we're all going to take space out, but that doesn't mean that people are going to lose that emotional attachment with the office. And I think that leads us nicely into kind of the hybrid model. And for us, that looks like focus kind of solo work at home, but then your collaboration and social connection in repurposed offices is really the sort of secret there. And I see a much wider adoption of kind of distributed estate models where you get, a high quality hub location with then smaller satellites that enable people to make those connections and to go into the office for those people that, need to. There's certain days when I know I've had the kids hanging around all day and, the ability to go to the office would have been absolutely fantastic just to get away. I think the other thing is what I'm finding really interesting is I'm seeing a lot of offices springing up, a lot of businesses springing up offering office in a box. And if you're not familiar with that term, it
doesn't sound very nice, I have to say, Martin.
It doesn't sound nice. No, well, you'll be surprised actually. So this is an improvement on home working. It's a great people engagement piece that on the day that you start a new organisation, your home office turns up in a box. And that's your desk, your chair, provided to by your employer, your keyboard, your mouse. And one organisation had even got, and this was in their sales pitch to me, we provide home branded joggers, our organisation branded joggers and house shoes. I sort of sat there and thought, house shoes, where I'm from, we call those slippers. And I kind of said, why are you providing branded joggers and house shoes? And I said, well, you only dress from the waist up now because you're on camera all day. So, we don't need to worry about what we're wearing on the bottom half. So that kind of, we start and think, what are they wearing as I'm chatting to them on yet another Zoom call. So I think that office in a box is a real kind of opportunity for occupiers to engage with their people. I think finally that, flex space, we want to see what flex space providers do with their business model. I think at the moment their service is good. I think their charging models need some work, and I'm interested to see kind of how that develops. But I'll just kind of close out with, it starts with culture, hybrid working, remote working, whatever format that you go to. Successful organisations will invest more in culture, and they will invest more in how they effectively manage their people when they are not in the office all of the time. And it was interesting, Adam Hoy, I think it was on the Cornet Predictions webinar last week, talked about the huge challenge the UK faces in this area around, making managers, upskilling managers and making them better to drive remote working cultures. In the UK, a manager position is not seen as something as an important role. In other countries, US, it's a career destination. I want to be a manager. You don't hear that very often in the UK, and I think there's a challenge there as we move to more remote working, that culture piece has to be really invested in. But yeah, just to conclude, we have to take a benefit from this pandemic. Not any part of it has been pleasant, but we need to capitalise on this as a change opportunity for workplace.
Thanks, Martin. I've jotted a couple of questions down, and well, three actually. So one is that you seem to talk a lot about changing work patterns and work style. What do you think the barriers are to the transition of hybrid work? And then I've noticed that you've talked a lot about data-driven decisions. How going forward are you going to keep those fresh? And then finally, something that you just mentioned, the office in a box, I think it was. We've had quite a few new people in our office who never actually got to meet anybody. They've been with us 6 months and they'd never face-to-face met anyone. And we've got young people as well. And I think the office is a place where they learn from other people, they have experience in different things. But I've just found a few things that you, so what are your thoughts on those, Martin?
So I think that the challenges around kind of hybrid working is almost, it's that reintroduction of a normality. At the moment, this is an enforced position. As you move back to that, you're going to have a mix of people who are going to say, I never want to come back in. I've enjoyed this, and that's it. And then you've got a mix of people who say, you know, getting back in is all that matters to me. I can't wait to get there. And I think that you can't just assume that it will happen. I think it has to be managed, and I think it has to be planned. It's not just a matter of, you know, the pandemic forced everybody to do something. We'll reintroduce a new model. You can't just hope that that all works and that gets back together. You've got to actually invest in that. You asked the second question. You're on mute, I think, Tina.
I need a T-shirt on that says you're on mute. About data-driven decisions and how you're going to keep them fresh.
Yeah, so data-driven decisions. I think I noticed in the chat box, we are lagging behind massively in the UK on intelligent buildings, and as you can imagine, as we go public with a statement of intent on reducing workplace, the amount of demonstrations I've seen of intelligent building solutions is massive, and it's a huge growth area. You can't effectively run a reduced portfolio without an investment in technology, and you can't do that without effective space management. So for me, the key is really that investment. And as you know, as you alluded to, our new development is really pushing that. But we're also, again, goes back to what I answered to the previous question. It's not going to happen naturally. You're not just going to drop an app onto somebody's phone and say, here's your intelligent building solution, off you trot. That's not the situation. There's a huge change plan that goes around with it and getting people into, you know, being familiar with that. Maybe today I can't go into the office because it's full. And maybe I need to get my team together. And again, that links back to what I said around managers. You know, you're going to have to do more planning around how you use your office space. And that isn't going to happen kind of by osmosis. That's going to need to be designed. I think your third one was on office in a box. You seemed and the onboarding of new people. Yeah, I mean, that's something we've faced as a challenge, and I think on the whole it's been pretty successful. I think our stats from our pulse surveys, we've got a survey we run with Your Voice on looking at our people engagement, and we've seen really kind of positive messages around the onboarding process and how we've connected that. I've got someone who started working for me in my team a year ago, and we've never met. We've never met face to face. And I think the transition to that kind of thing, and I don't think that'll have to continue, because I think that as we return to the office, we will be able to welcome people in. But the secret for me on that, I think, has been you have to invest more time. And actually, it's a better human connection because you are investing more time. How many of us have brought somebody new into the business, said, "Oh, hi," on day one, and you might have the odd catch up with them, and there's a sense of isolation when you particularly move to a big organisation. But I think every one of our people has felt that the business has really connected with them, has taken the time to connect on a personal level. And I think that's actually a really nice thing. And even if we went back to a full-time kind of office, the learning experience for me, I would make more time for new starters and new people into the business to really get to know them, understand them. But yeah, that's what I think on that. But I think, yeah, office in a box is a definite opportunity for OP. I'll talk to you about that offline.
Patent that one for us, Martin. Somebody's just asked, actually, I saw quickly asking what actual industry you're in, Martin.
Yeah, sorry. So we're a design and engineering consultancy. We're so it would be professional services.
Brilliant, thank you. And Richard, over to you. So what can landlords do to respond to changes in office demand post the COVID world?
Well, thanks, Tina. Good morning, everyone. I think it's very useful that I'm going third here, because I think it is quite useful with a landlord perspective to respond to what both Theo and Martin have said. And I've just had something flash up on my screen telling me my internet connection is unstable. So I'm desperately going to hope that I can stay with all of you to give these answers. Because there's a lot of challenges for landlords in response to everything that Theo and Martin have said. And the challenge is that office buildings are fixed assets. They're they're generally inflexible. There's huge embedded cost in producing office buildings, and when that investment is required, you can't simply pick up an office building and move it. Nor do I think office buildings are necessarily in the wrong places, but there has always got to be an economic justification for changes that are going to be made to buildings. And when you think about the ownership of an awful lot of the commercial property around the UK, it's owned by pension funds, it's owned by institutions, it's there to deliver an outcome for investors. So there is always an economic test for anything that needs to be done before you even think about sustainability and the embedded carbon that sits in those office buildings. But for me, the changes that are required aren't necessarily to the buildings themselves. It's a change in attitude and expectations from the landlord community. That's really what's going to be required. You know, what we're moving away from, and hearing everything that Martin and Theo have talked about, is we need to move away from a feudal relationship between landlord and tenant. What landlords need to do, and I'm different to Theo in that he can talk with both a landlord and tenant hat. He represents both. I don't. I sit purely on the landlord side, but I can't think like that anymore. If I'm not thinking about what my tenants want, then I'm not going to be successful as a landlord, because as we move away from that feudal relationship, landlords no longer distant rent collectors. You have 4 touch points with a tenant every year when they send the rent demand in. That's just not going to work anymore. We need to recognize tenants as customers. And when you've got customers, you want to make sure your customers are satisfied. That's what's going to keep them, bring them back to your buildings and retain them in the longer term. So what we need to do is respond and recognize what our customers want. And Theo and Martin have listed an awful lot of things that businesses want, but they've also described a huge range of different things. And that's part of the challenge for landlords, that we therefore need to provide flexibility in the solutions that we give occupiers, because they want different things. There are some occupiers out there who are very happy to fit out their own space. They want to put their own image on the space. They've got their own plans for it. There are other businesses who basically say, I don't do property, I want someone else to solve that for me. I just want my staff to come in. So when we talk to our occupiers to understand what they want, what's clear to us is they don't really think about it as we want an office. What they basically tell us is they want a productive workforce. And to put that in context, the stats and the analysis that we've seen is that around 10% of a business's costs are going to be rent and property costs. 90% are staffing costs. So when you put it in that context, making sure that your staff have got what they need is a far more important job. So for us as a landlord, we've got to make sure that our customers, our occupiers, are being given spaces that enable them to give their staff what they need. And as I said before, that depends on whether that's something that we're providing for them because they either don't want to provide that and they're happy to pay for someone else to deliver it, or they're going to do it themselves. We need to create those environments where they're able to do that, and hopefully that keeps them in our buildings and keeps them as repeat customers going forward.
Thanks, Richard. And what do you think will drive the value in office assets in the future?
Well, I think the valuation of property is changing, and we all need to recognise that. Property is an operational asset. And just in my career, and I've been in property for 25 years, we've already seen a huge change in the way that property assets are valued and sort of are recognised. And where we're moving to is that lease length and covenant alone as the drivers of value are changing. For one thing, lease lengths are getting shorter. I mean, the UK has historically had far longer leases than European and US markets. But in an environment where we have systemic disruption, occupiers wanting flexibility and changing accounting rules as well, we're increasingly seeing lease lengths getting shorter. So lease length alone is not going to be the driver of value in an awful lot of office buildings going forward. And covenant is also becoming less relevant. There will still be examples of very strong businesses taking long commitments because they can make that long-term commitment. But increasingly we see startups and smaller businesses, and 2020 has demonstrated just how many businesses that we would all recognise as good quality have failed. So lease length and covenant, I don't believe are going to be the driver of value going forward. Instead, it's about operational property and creating buildings which have sustainable income streams. And Theo made the point around the rents that different tenants pay can really vary within a single building, depending on the solution and the fit out that the landlord's providing. So it's not as simple anymore as saying, right, I'm just going to create a headline rent in this building. I'm going to receive that rent in perpetuity, and there'll be some growth based around some macroeconomic events, and that's what's going to deliver value. It's not like that anymore. What we require is buildings where landlords and tenants are working in partnership, and that's what's going to create sustainable income streams. And we're seeing this in other sectors. You know, turnover rents are becoming the model for retailers, where there is a greater sharing of risk between landlord and tenant. But if the landlord can create an ecosystem where occupiers want to be, where they actually see value in being around other businesses, and that's going to drive the income stream going forward, that's what's going to be recognised by investors. It won't be around lease length. And that's where management skills suddenly starts to offer a premium. And we see it in the REITs market, where the value of those companies is not just around the net asset value of the underlying assets. It's around the skill of the management team and what they're doing in that particular space. I think we will see that increasingly across office markets as we work to create ecosystems within which occupiers want to take space, they can expand, they can consolidate, they have flexibility, but you have confidence about a long-term income stream because of that ecosystem that you've created.
Thanks, Richard. It's quite interesting actually, because I'm really excited about some of the things that have happened with the office. We've seen some big changes over the last 10 months, and things that we've been talking to with people in the past 3 to 4 years are now being accelerated, and people are getting excited about doing things. We've had some great projects that we've worked on through the pandemic, not least the HQ in London, but it's really exciting, and there's lots of things to do there. And I think actually ultimately the end users, the people who come to those offices, are going to benefit from it. But we've had some fantastic questions actually, which I have a little person behind here who's given me them, so I'm just going to read them. One of them is, do you think a return to the office will give a big take up to start with, as we're all bored at home, and then level off again? Ask Martin. So Martin, that's your one.
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen is, so we reopened a few offices, and to give people that kind of respite to get back in. The pattern was, you would see on the first kind of few days that people would start to come back, but the feedback that we got was, yes, but it's not what it was, because kind of all my friends and colleagues aren't there, and it's a little bit empty. So again, it goes back to what I said, that this kind of reintroduction, I think it has to be planned. So I think if you just kind of let it happen, people will drift back in. It won't be what it was. You won't get that buzz that you get from a really kind of nice, busy office that we all enjoy. And it'll be, well, I think I might as well stay at home, because, you know, my commute across the hall is actually better than sitting in traffic or sitting on a train. And I think that then kind of goes back to that sort of intelligent buildings solution. Again, that's a great way of sort of managing it. And I know in our own kind of product that we've built around intelligent buildings with a partner organisation, and that's part of it. That reintroduction piece and how you stimulate that interest through digital engagement is really important. So yeah, I don't think it's just something that's going to happen naturally. I think it needs to be managed in order for people to get the right kind of experience. I'm going to say it again, Tina, you're on mute.
Not very good at this, am I? There's another question which I think actually Richard and Martin, you could answer. It's got, the panels mention carbon footprint. Is this only in reference to a reduction in square foot, or are we seeing more sustainable systems? So Peaks, Martin, who's up for answering that one?
Well, when I mentioned it, it was definitely in the context of embedded carbon and sustainability. And I think, you know, there's an increasing challenge that we want more efficient buildings, but existing buildings are huge carbon sinks, and it's not sustainable just to go knocking down an office building and building a new one. So what we need to look at is whether we can repurpose existing buildings to provide the workplaces that tenants want. So everyone's looking at reducing their carbon footprint. Property managers are part of that job. We're looking at ways of running our existing buildings more efficiently, and we're very aware that the solution can't always be to say, we'll just knock this one down and build a new, more efficient one. Overall, that may not be a more sustainable way of dealing with our climate change challenges.
Martin, have you got a view?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably two things. Totally agree with Theo that the concept of just knocking things down and rebuilding them to be more energy efficient that's just not acceptable. The repurposing, I think, is really important. I think landlords have got a lot to play in this with occupiers. So if we look at where we've got a significant part of a building, we've got a lot more sway over a landlord, and we can insist on our own energy suppliers, our own sub-metering, etc. Where we're a minority part of a building, quite often we're just dictated to. So I think there's a response from landlords to be a bit more flexible around what their tenants want. Again, that links into kind of intelligent building solutions, and that is an excellent way of actually understanding what your energy usage is. You'd be amazed that probably in our whole estate, we're probably only in a position where we can accurately report energy use in around 30%, which is absolutely ridiculous. But that's due to the leases that we've signed with landlords. We have to be more selective around the buildings that we choose as well, and where we locate them. And that's an interesting dynamic now around carbon with COVID, because traditionally, more sustainable buildings are in the city centre because they've got mass transit hubs and people can use public transport. However, COVID is kind of saying to us, well, perhaps you need to relocate out of there. So that brings in the problem with kind of individual travel to the office. We've also, because part of our business is a huge element of sustainability consulting, I get a lot of pressure from our own kind of people on, what about the increase in carbon through more people working at home? And that's where we're stuck in a bit of a transition at the minute. So if you look at our carbon output at the moment, it hasn't really dropped because we're still running our estate as was prior to people working from home. So we've got a double hit on energy use because there is more at home. We've got an offset because there's a bit of a less of a commute. And as you said in the intro, I also look after travel for us globally. So we've seen a huge drop in our travel footprint. But yeah, undoubtedly, again, it's that technology solution that I think will assist occupiers. But there's a big piece that landlords need to do to give more choice to us.
Thanks, Martin. Somebody's actually mentioned in the chat that there's a charity. You're on mute, so I think I owe you some pound notes apparently. So I'll be contacting you later for that one. Question for you, Theo. Can you envisage a scenario where large occupiers adopt a hub and spoke model? Example, the city centre office with satellites closer to where people live.
I think on a national scale, the macro scale, the hub and spoke model certainly makes sense. I do kind of wonder though on a more regional basis. Martin kind of touched upon when people come back to the office and it hasn't got the same buzz because the people aren't there, the teams aren't there. If you have a smaller regional headquarters, but then you decide to hub and spoke it, I feel, and this is a personal preference. When I go in the office, I want to be in the office and I want it to be buzzy, or I'll be at home. Not in between, not to a smaller office where there are less people and there's less cross-flow of information and collaboration. That to me doesn't seem to make quite as much sense. The hub and spoke model across the country, get it. Locally, could I see people reducing Birmingham footprints and having some space in Wolverhampton, Solihull, the rest of it? No, I mean our commutes in the regions aren't that problematic typically. And I think if I was going into the office for 3 days or 2 days, I want to be in the larger office with all the amenities that the city brings and all the things that we kind of loved about going to work. And on the days that I'm off, I'm not there. So yeah, that nationally, yes, locally, less so.
That's another £1 I owe somebody. Please, it's made you chuckle, Martin. Peaks, we've been asked if you think there'll be a reduction in rateable value. I think that's a question that I'm guessing the answer.
Well, that's a tricky one. But I mean, by rights, yes, there needs to be some changes to rateable values to reflect, and some rateable values will need to go up as we look at the rents associated with fitted space. You know, Theo said it can range from 40 to 90 pounds per square foot in Birmingham. In London, it's it's £50 up to 400 for a fitted solution in Mayfair. The reality is the rating system is massively archaic. It's not fit. It wasn't fit for purpose before some of these changes came about. So do I see drastic changes recognizing the fast moving property market we're in? No, it's just not set up to deal with that. So there'll be lots of appeals, there'll be lots of challenges, and they'll be stuck in the quagmire that is the rating system for a long time. It should change. It's just not built to respond quickly to these kind of things.
Brilliant, thank you. So, James, well, thank you for your time today. You've been brilliant as always. I actually think there's been some really interesting subjects that potentially could link to our next webinar topics. I'm going to put you a bit on the spot now. Has any of you got some suggestions on what that might be? And then what we're going to do is take suggestions that you've got, and anybody who's listening on the audience, if you've got any questions or topics that you think will be suitable for the next webinar, then drop them down, and we're going to run a social media campaign to see what that question should be. But anybody up? Martin, you're never lost for anything to say. I bet you've got a question.
I'll take that as a compliment. Well, I've got two. I'm going to be greedy, actually. I've got two. There's a really interesting question that's come in around. It's from. I won't say the name out. I always get confused on GDPR about what I can and can't do. So I'll just say there's a really good question. Okay, and it talks about achieving a good balance of working from home and encouraging people to come into the office and kind of building that trust-based culture from senior people. We've seen that in different parts of our global footprint, that presenteeism still exists in a lot of different countries, but it also still exists in the UK in some organisations, and there's a need to kind of modernise that around, you have to be more inclusive. People have got home lives that dictate when they can and can't work. So I think there's a really interesting bit around that piece on culture. And probably a simpler one, because that's a bit of a challenge for you to put that one on. I'd like to hear more from flex providers, and there's a question coming around do we see WeWork and other ones are available, moving out to less city centre locations and stuff like that. I'd like to see kind of what the flex space market, because we may choose to use that far more than we currently do, but that's not a 5-person serviced office. It needs to be better quality, flexible space, and just interested to see where they're coming from. So there's 2 ideas from me.
Brilliant. Okay, anything from Peaks or Theo? Or are you going to have a think?
My suggestion being in 9 months' time, there's a seminar titled "Did They All Come Back?" And we see, we're in the middle of an experiment at the moment. We need to get to the end of the experiment to evaluate what's worked, what hasn't. Did everyone come back or not?
Excellent, thank you. Right, guys, thank you very much. And to our guests online today, thank you. You've put some interesting questions, and there's been quite a lot of interest on building intelligence, actually, and carbon footprint. So I think that's also something that we could perhaps talk about. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Take care.